Chairman Chun Tan-sun, Mark Chun, old friend, thank you very much for asking me to speak at this conference, for asking me to come to this conference. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, David Lee. Thank you for your great introduction. And greetings to all of the honored guests here, the former speakers, and all of you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Mark Chun, as I know him, he asked me to say a few words about promoting regional dialogue in the Asia-Pacific region, drawing on my experience in strengthening people-to-people ties between Taiwan and the U.S. And he thought that experience might have some relevance for developing partnership between Taiwan and the countries of Southeast and South Asia. So I made some notes on that subject, and I came here to the conference, and frankly, I was very impressed this morning and this afternoon with an excellent conference, and I think you've got it figured out. I mean, I think you've already made tremendous progress in exactly having that kind of collaboration, so therefore, I mean, I'll tell some stories about my experiences and things which might be relevant, but I'm really very impressed at this first conference and how far down the road you already are in developing the networks that you need. And of course, I'm not in an official position anymore, so I can basically be very free in what I say. I see David looking a little worried about that right now, but no. I think there are two key points that I want to make, which one is that the need to be, and especially talking about Taiwan, and I think sort of the thing that no one talks about, but we have to be frank about, is Taiwan has a unique international position, and it has a unique problem because of that position. And what that means is that the kind of collaboration you're seeing in your southward policy has to be, we have to, not only Taiwan, but all of the other countries in working with Taiwan, we have to be creative. We have to be imaginative. A lot of the sort of familiar ways in which countries do that kind of collaboration, especially in a multilateral, it'll work in a bilateral, they'll work in a bilateral way, but in a multilateral way, you have to be smart. You have to be creative. And then the second point I would stress, and I commend this conference because basically you get it. This conference gets this point, which is the tremendous importance of non-governmental organizations in this collaboration. And I think this is particularly important in the case of collaboration involving Taiwan, because the non-governmental organizations, the civil society, they're freer than governments. They're not as politically intimidated. They're not as likely to be intimidated by the threats from any country which might wish to keep Taiwan isolated. The kind of civil society, and what strikes me is that the kind of civil society collaboration that we've been talking about here at this conference, and that's so important for Taiwan, is very much part of a worldwide trend today. And not just for political actors that have in the world stage, which have a somewhat unusual status like Taiwan. International relations today really, it's so much more than relations between foreign ministries and embassies. There's been just a worldwide trend of multinational corporations, nonprofit organizations, universities, think tanks, museums, and individuals, all being major players in international relations today. But I would go so far as to say, as in 2017, if two governments are aware of nearly all of the interactions that are going on between their two peoples, that means they must have very stunted relations, in which not much is going on between them. Because I remember in many of the embassies I've worked in Vietnam, in other places, we thought there is so much that goes on between our two countries that we don't know about in the embassy. We don't need to know about it. It's part of the richness of the relationship that goes on without the government having to be involved. It was really in Vietnam that I came to deeply appreciate the powerful international role that is played by civil society. Because for years I was involved in the whole complicated, delicate process, slow process of reestablishing U.S.-Vietnam relations after the Vietnam War. And what's very striking about the U.S.-Vietnam case is that the people-to-people ties were essential to develop the trust, to break down the lack of trust that had existed between what were basically two former enemies. And it was really over more than 10 years that veterans organizations, artists, humanitarian foundations, and private companies essentially restored the bilateral relationship. They had done it. Then when that was done, then we could have the official ties, which was sort of the icing on the cake after all of that. Now, in the case of Taiwan and the United States, the U.S. and this island also have a very rich civil society relationship, knit by educational organizations, religious institutions, and our private companies. Our government, working through the American Institute in Taiwan, which I headed for many years, both here in Taiwan and also back in Washington, collaborated with the Taiwan government to bring about numerous programs, in a sense, supplementing, suggesting, aiding the kind of collaboration that was already going on between our companies and our private organizations. But about 2 years ago, we took that, we meaning AIT and our counterparts here in Taiwan, we took that another step further. It was sort of what we wanted to see was bilateral relations were easy. How could we make them more multilateral? And this was dealing with, again, with Taiwan's unique situation. Because Taiwan is not a member of UN organizations like the World Health Organization, there are a lot of multilateral activities that go on in the world that Taiwan is not able to take part in, or it's difficult, or it's a fight every time to get Taiwan to be able to take part in it. So how do we deal with that? How do we sort of break down that barrier? So we decided we'd create our own multilateral organization. Essentially a bilateral one, but we use it in a multilateral way. And we call it the Global Cooperation and Training Framework. Even though I helped to create that, I had to look it up because it's one of those bureaucratic names. But anyway, the GCTF. GCTF. And so we have used it quite successfully for a lot of good activities. And we've also brought in other countries, including many which some of the participants in this room represent. And the kind of activities that we've used it for have been dealing with global and regional issues. A lot of programs on public health, something which Taiwan is very strong on, very strong record on. Economic development, energy, women's rights, disaster relief, and environmental issues, another real strength of Taiwan. And this has been, one example which I had a personal involvement in was creating, we worked together to create a leadership training program for young people from the Pacific Islands. And we used, as one of the key organizers, key instrumentalities to carry out the program. The East-West Center in Honolulu, which is an organization that I've had a long personal relationship with, and it's working, and it works very well. I want to sort of close with talking about another subject, which is sort of related to the theme of this conference. I think one of the things that is often the case, not so much in this, let's say one of the things I was afraid of was that in conferences like this, which are organized by government officials like me and like David and so forth, former government officials, and by people from think tanks and people from universities, that the role of the private sector tends to sometimes get forgotten. And the private sector is so important. But congratulations to this conference, congratulations to the Prospect Foundation. That actually is not the case. I thought that today there was very good discussion and very concrete discussion about the role of the private sector, what it's doing and the more that it can do. And that's terrific. Because of course the private sector here in Taiwan is just a remarkable phenomenon of with leaders in the world in ICT industry, in computer chips, in bicycles, you name it. I mean, I always think back, I was here when the 1999, September 21st, 1999 earthquake came. The day that earthquake came, the NASDAQ exchange, which is for technology stocks, crashed because of the concern about losing Taiwan's role in the global supply chain for chips and for computer. And it didn't recover until the investors were sure that Taiwan was going to get back on its feet soon in producing all those chips. That's how important Taiwan is, and that's how significant. And so there's a huge asset. But I think there's another asset which perhaps didn't get mentioned today. I think it's the modesty of our Taiwanese hosts in not wanting to brag about the great features that exist here, which make Taiwan's business culture something so special, and something which has so many great advantages over some of its neighbors. It's not perfect. Sometimes some of the labor policies here, some of the kind of allergy against private equity investment. Some of those things are, can be problems, but those are trifles. They're nothing when we look at the huge advantages that are here in doing business with Taiwan, not only in Taiwan, but collaborating with Taiwan companies in other countries, or having Taiwanese companies and your companies collaborate together on projects. And I base my comments on, comparing the Taiwan advantage, as I would call it, with dealing with other countries in the region. I base on years of experience as a diplomat, working with American companies I have to look at the list. Not only Taipei, but Beijing, Shanghai, Hanoi, Seoul, Manila, you name it, and all the places I've worked. And working with American companies to do what? Helping them to deal with local disputes with their partners, difficulties getting into the market, trying to win contracts. That's what part of what diplomats do. And in Taiwan, there are several things that make Taiwan really stand out in a positive way. First of all, is rule of law. Not rule by law, which you run into in some other particularly large places, but rule of law in Taiwan. This means that if you have a legal dispute here, if your company has a legal dispute here, if you have a legal dispute with a Taiwan company in Vietnam or in the United States or something, you can have trust that the judicial system is going to work well here. And as we all know, that's not the case in some of those cities that I mentioned. Secondly, Taiwanese government is not going to steal your technology. Also, a huge problem in so many other places in the region. Taiwan company might try to do it, but again, you've got rule of law. You can go, you'll probably be able to fix that problem in the judicial system here. And I go back, the first time I came to Taiwan was 40 years ago. And I remember on the way to Vietnam during the war. And I still have a large collection of books pirated in Taiwan. Taiwan was not always so great on intellectual property rights, but that problem is gone here. That is not a problem anymore. Again, not something we can say about some of your neighbors. If you invest here, also, something we've been reading about a lot lately in terms of problems in some other large places, if you invest here, you are not going to be pressured by the government, not going to be pressured by state-owned enterprises to give up all of your precious technology before you can invest here. That's another huge advantage. Finally, just make an observation, particularly in the United States, looking at how Taiwan companies operate in places from the South Texas coast, where I've been to see the companies working there, to New York City, and that's a lot of diversity between New York City and the South Texas coast. But what you see is the same everywhere. It is remarkable how much the Taiwan companies become part of the community, become respected citizens in the way they deal with the people in the areas. And that's something that's very commendable and something you want in your country. So I'll conclude by reiterating the two main points that I made at the beginning. The first is the need to be creative in the structure of how we organize ourselves in cooperating and collaborating with Taiwan. There's so much to do, as we heard in the conference today, but it involves a little bit of creativity. And we have to always keep in mind how we sort of deal with Taiwan's particular status and make it work. And the second is the valuable role of civil society. And I would say, let's always remember, that very much includes the private sector, particularly in the case of Taiwan. And sometimes that collaboration by the civil society requires a little bit of behind-the-scenes encouragement by all of your governments. So thank you very much.